Imagine you stand at the ragged edge of Vienna, AD 1683, where the last open fields thin into gardens, and gardens harden into stone. You see refugees stumbling toward the gates like sleepwalkers, faces split by sun and panic, hands empty except for the death grip on a child's wrist. They say one word again and again, like a prayer that curdles in the mouth: the Ottomans. You feel the city pulling its breath inward, because that word means a camp that does not pass through. It settles. It surrounds. It waits. You smell them before you see them: smoke, horse sweat, and the bitter tang of thousands of cooking fires that intend to burn for weeks. The wind carries it over the grass and into the streets like an omen you cannot shut out. You press your palm to the fortification stone, and it feels cold and solid, almost eternal. But the first distant cannon note rolls over the land, low as thunder, and the wall stops being a monument. It becomes a deadline. Inside the city, the normal world breaks in small sounds that scrape the nerves raw. You hear shutters slam too hard, church bells rung too fast, wagons groaning as they pull inward, wheels bumping over cobbles as if the stones themselves protest. You see men in aprons carrying barrels of salted meat as if carrying a coffin. You hear a woman sob in a doorway while counting bread into a new ledger, like a household New Year budget that will not last a week. You feel the first shift, the moment when every ordinary object becomes a tool of survival. Rope turns into barricade. Furniture turns into a breastwork. Every pot turns into a rationing plan. Scouts return, boots dusted pale, eyes wide. One swears the enemy looks like a sea, tense to the horizon, a moving coastline of men and horses. Another insists it is only a hard storm, a great army but not the end of the world. You do not receive certainty. You receive hours. The officers speak with voices that pretend to be calm, because calm is a weapon too. You are told to hold, because help is promised: imperial troops, allies, perhaps even the Poles. But promises do not stop cannonballs, therefore you swallow fear and start working like a creature building a nest in a burning tree. The first days press into the first nights, and the siege teaches its rhythm. Boom, a distant cough of artillery. Therefore the air tightens. Therefore the whistle comes, thin and quick. Therefore the crack arrives, and the impact throws powdered brick into your hair and eyes. You blink grit. You spit grit. It sticks to sweat and turns your skin into plaster. You see the wall shiver with each strike, not enough to fall, but enough to remind you that stone is not immortal. You learn to recognize sounds the way a sailor reads waves. A low boom means a heavy shot. A sharper report means a different gun. A buzzing hiss means something smaller, meaner, closer. Every noise becomes a message, but the message is always the same: pressure. Constant. Patient. When the Ottomans settle fully around Vienna, the horizon changes shape. You climb to a parapet and see the enemy camp spread like a second city, tents pale in the sunlight, banners snapping like tongues. You see lines of men moving with purpose, digging, hauling, assembling. It does not look like a raid. It looks like a machine unfolding. You feel your stomach sink, because a machine does not tire the way courage tires. But inside the walls, the city becomes its own machine. You watch masons slap fresh mortar into cracks while cannon smoke drifts over their shoulders. You see boys carry baskets of earth, slipping on rubble, faces smeared gray. You hear orders shouted, prayers muttered, arguments hissed through clenched teeth. Everyone moves, therefore everyone survives one more day. Food becomes a math problem solved with shaking hands. You chew rye bread that tastes like sawdust and stale cellar air. It sits heavy in the gut but does not satisfy. You watch portions shrink. You watch a strong man stare at a leather strap like it is a roast. Therefore you understand hunger is not a metaphor here. Hunger is a sound, the hollow thud of your own heartbeat in your ears when you stand too fast. Hunger is a smell, the sour breath of a neighbor who has not tasted fat in days. Water grows precious. You see buckets hauled from wells like treasure. You hear arguments at the pump, not because anyone wants to be cruel, but because thirst makes a beast out of gentleness. You feel your tongue roughen, and the air inside your mouth tastes like ash. The bombardment never truly stops. It only changes mood. Some mornings the guns speak lazy and distant, as if the besiegers conserve strength. But other mornings the cannon talk like a storm that finds a roof. Each hit sends splinters of stone outward, therefore men run with beams and sacks, therefore hands bleed, therefore the wall holds again, for now. Night arrives, and night feels worse than day. Day shows you threats you can aim at. Night hides them, therefore the imagination turns into its own enemy. You lie with your ear pressed against the earth, cheek against cold dirt, listening for the thin, deliberate scratching of sappers. You hear it sometimes, faint like a rat in a wall. Scrape, scrape, pause. You hold your breath and try to decide if it is real. Sometimes you hear nothing, and that is when panic spreads, because silence might mean the tunnel is already under you. You don't know if the next step is safe. You don't know if the next corner of the bastion sits above empty space. The ground that once feels like home now feels like a ceiling that might drop. Therefore, counterminers go down. You follow, because there is always another shovel needed, another arm needed, another body to fill a gap. You climb into a black throat of passage cut beneath the city, air thick with damp and lamp smoke. The flame of the lamp trembles, making shadows jump like living things. You smell wet clay, mold, and the sharp tang of fierce sweat trapped in wool. The tunnel presses close. Your shoulders brush dirt walls. You feel the weight of the city above you like a hand on your neck. You hear breath ahead, too fast, too loud, men trying to be quiet, but failing because the body refuses to whisper when it fears burial. A shovel bites earth with a dull crunch. Another answers. The sound travels through soil like a secret. Somewhere beyond, Ottoman sappers scratch their own secret. You don't know if a wall of dirt separates you by a foot or by a yard. You don't know if their next stroke breaks through into your face. Therefore, every scrape becomes a drumbeat. The moment comes when the sound changes. You hear a hollow note, the earth suddenly less solid. You taste lamp smoke and metal because someone near you grips a tool too hard. A whisper passes. Stop. Listen. You press your ear to the wall of soil, and you hear them, voices muffled in another language, but unmistakably human. So close that a cough could betray you. You feel the urge to run, but there is nowhere to run in a tunnel. You see hands signal in the dim. Prepare. Someone pushes forward a small barrel or a wrapped bundle, something heavy that bumps the ground with a soft thud. A fuse appears, thin as a shoelace. The lamp flame trembles again, therefore the fuse looks like a living thread. You don't know if the plan works. You don't know if the blast collapses their tunnel or yours. But you know that if nothing happens, their mine reaches the wall, and the wall becomes a crater, and the city becomes a slaughter pen. Therefore a spark touches the fuse. The hiss begins, quiet and vicious. You crawl backward on elbows, knees scraping clay. The air seems to thicken, as if the tunnel holds its breath with you. You feel your heart pound in your throat. The hiss races, therefore you count without numbers, only with pulses. Now, 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 until the earth punches you. The explosion does not sound like a cannon. It sounds like the world breaking its jaw. Dirt slams into your back. The lamp goes out. Darkness becomes physical, a cloth shoved into your face. You taste grit and blood. You hear a man scream once and then stop, as if the sound is cut. You don't know if the roof holds. You don't know if the city above collapses. But the tunnel remains, partly. You feel air rush in from a new crack, carrying a different stink, burnt powder, fresh soil, and something worse, something like singed hair. Someone relights the lamp with shaking hands, therefore the light returns like mercy. You see faces pale with clay, eyes too wide. You see the wall ahead blown open into a jagged mouth. The enemy is close. A shadow moves on the other side. A blade flashes, then vanishes. A hand grabs at the edge, fingers clawing for grip. You swing a tool, pick, shovel, anything, because a tunnel turns every object into a weapon. You feel the impact travel up your arms. The hand disappears. You hear a grunt, a wet sound, and then only breathing again. Up above, life continues in its broken pattern. Disease stalks the alleys like a quiet arsonist. Latrines overflow. You see flies land on everything, bread, wounds, eyes. You smell rotware refuse piles against walls. A cough spreads through a baroque room like a rumor no guard can arrest. One man coughs, therefore another coughs, therefore by morning half the room sounds like old bellows. Fever makes faces shine. You touch a friend's forehead and feel heat that does not belong to daylight. You see lips cracked, eyes sunk, therefore you understand the siege is not one battle. It is 1,000 daily murders, each one small enough to ignore until the pile becomes a mountain. Outside the walls, beyond smoke, help is said to gather. The rumor moves like a candle flame passed hand to hand. Some say imperial troops march. Some say allies argue and delay. Some say the Poles come with a king and a hammer of cavalry. You want to believe it, but belief feels dangerous. Therefore, every dawn that arrives without them tastes like betrayal. Dawn comes gray, smeared with smoke. You stand on the wall and squint into the distance until your eyes water. You see nothing but enemy tents and the slow movement of men building death. Therefore, hope becomes a discipline, not a feeling. You force it to exist the way you force a door shut against wind. The Ottomans probe the defenses like fingers testing a cracked cup. They send shots to weaken a bastion. They dig saps closer, zigzagging trenches that crawl forward by inches. Therefore, each day the enemy line sits nearer. You see their works rise like scars in the earth. You hear the snap of muskets, the occasional scream when a lookout's head appears too high. You feel the urge to shrink, to vanish, but the wall demands a body. Therefore, you remain. One afternoon, the bombardment intensifies. The air shakes. Birds vanish. You see a section of wall crumble outward in a spray of stone. Dust blooms. Men shout. Someone drops a bucket. You taste grit again. Therefore you run with others, carrying sacks of earth, beams torn from houses, doors ripped from hinges. You do not think about the home those doors belong to. You think about the gap. Hands throw debris into the breach. Bodies lean shoulder to shoulder. You feel the edge of a plank dig into your palm. You feel your muscles shake with effort. An officer screams for speed, but speed is a luxury in rubble. The enemy fire thickens, therefore men flinch, therefore someone falls, therefore the rest step over him because stopping means dying in place. The breach becomes a mouth, and the besiegers try to bite. You see figures surge forward in smoke, shapes with curved blades, with long weapons, with shields that flash. You fire, or stab, or throw stones, because in a breach every defense becomes personal. You smell black powder, sharp and bitter, like burned eggs and lightning. You hear the crack of muskets close enough to sting the ear. The enemy recoils this time, but nothing feels finished. Nothing feels safe. Therefore night arrives again with its listening and its dread. You sleep in scraps, boots on, clothing stiff with sweat and dust. Your dreams are short and violent, and waking feels like drowning upward into air. Weeks grind on. The city's face changes. You see scorch marks on walls. You see windows boarded, churches turned into storehouses, squares turned into drill yards. You smell smoke permanently embedded in cloth. Even bread smells faintly of powder. You notice that conversation shrinks. People stop speaking of tomorrow in long sentences. They speak in tasks: fetch water, patch this, carry that, pray now. But something else grows as supplies shrink: improvisation. You see men strip iron from gates to repair cannon mounts. You see women hauling water in lines, silent, eyes forward, as if refusing to let fear distract the hands. You see children carry messages because small bodies slip through rubble faster. Therefore, the city becomes a living organism under pressure, adapting minute by minute. The Ottomans push closer. The mines continue. Some blasts shake the ground like a giant kicks the city's foundations. You see dust fall from ceilings indoors. You see candles flicker in chapels. You hear prayers become sharper, less polite. The fear becomes intimate, fear of the floor under your feet. One night, a rumor spreads that the wall cannot last another week. Another rumor says help is only days away. You do not know which rumor carries truth. The only certainty is hunger and noise. Therefore, every person in Vienna becomes a gambler forced to place a bet without seeing the cards. Then the decisive day comes like a held breath-breaking. It is AD 1683, September, but it does not feel like a month on a calendar. It feels like the body recognizing a moment. Before sunrise, the horizon flickers with torch lines on the heights. You see movement where there should be only darkness and trees. Are they enemies repositioning for a final push? Or friends arriving too late? You feel your stomach twist because hope and doom look the same from far away. Both arrive as lights in the night. From the wall you watch the Ottoman camp below, a sea of tents like pale teeth. You see artillery pieces like dark fingers pointing at your heart. Weeks of bombardment leave your ears ringing. Even silence hurts. Therefore, the quiet before dawn feels like a cruel trick. Smoke lies low, and the first light makes it glow bruised purple. The Ottoman lines stir. Drums begin somewhere, dull, steady, like a heartbeat not your own. You see men form, banners lift. Therefore, you brace for another assault. At the same time, on the ridges, shapes gather. You squint until your eyes burn. You see glints, metal catching first light. You hear distant horns, or perhaps imagination invents them. You do not know. Fog of war wraps everything in uncertainty. Cannons answer cannons. The first volleys crash from the heights and roll down into the plain. The air fills with smoke and shredded leaf. You taste the metallic edge of fear, like licking a coin. The ground trembles under repeated concussion. You see Ottoman guns respond, flashes blooming like brief suns. Therefore, the space between ridge and camp becomes a furnace of sound. Assault columns press toward Vienna's battered edges because the besiegers sense time tightening. You see ladders appear, men running hunched. You hear whistles of shot. Defenders shove back with pike, shot, and raw hands. Hands grab stones hot from sun and throw them down. Hands pour boiling water or worse. You smell burned wood and hot iron. A man beside you loads a musket with fingers that shake so badly the powder spills. He swears, breath ragged. He tries again. He fires. The recoil jerks his shoulder, therefore he laughs once, high, cracked, because the body releases tension in strange ways when it thinks it might die. The fighting surges and ebbs like a tide. You see faces in smoke, close enough to see teeth. A blade arcs. A shot strikes stone and throws chips into eyes. Someone screams for a medic, but medics are only men with cloth and courage, therefore the scream becomes just another sound swallowed by the greater roar. Then attention drags upward, toward the ridge. The shapes on the heights sharpen as daylight strengthens. You see lines of infantry pushing forward, therefore the Ottoman camp begins to react, men turning, officers gesturing. Confusion ripples through the besiegers like wind through wheat. You do not know if the relief force is large enough. You do not know if it arrives in time, but it exists. Existence itself feels like a weapon. The battle becomes a storm you stand inside. Smoke punches the lungs. Your throat tastes like soot. The sun climbs, but the light looks sickly through haze. You hear the constant rattle of musketry like tearing cloth. Cannons hammer. Horses scream. Men shout orders that vanish instantly in noise. You feel the wall beneath your boots vibrate, as if the stone itself shares your fear. Hours stretch. Each minute feels like a whole day. Vienna holds, but barely. A breach threatens again. A mine blast shakes a section. Dust pours from cracks. You see defenders run with beams. You see someone drag a wounded man by the collar, the wounded man leaving a smear of blood on stone like paint. Therefore, survival becomes a series of ugly decisions made too fast. And then, above it all, something impossible gathers. On the ridge, figures crest the hill with a presence that looks like myth made heavy. You see wings, not feathers, but wooden frames and fur and banners streaming behind helmets. You see armor catching light in sharp flashes. You hear a deep roar that might be thousands of voices, or might be the earth itself responding. You don't know if the sight is real or hunger conjures it. But the shape of hope moves. It moves downhill. Heavy cavalry forms like a dark wave. You see lances tilt, a forest of points. You see horses packed shoulder to shoulder, muscles bunching beneath tack. The riders sit encased in metal and leather, therefore they look less like men and more like a single machine with many eyes. The line hesitates for a breath, one last moment where anything can go wrong. A stumble can ripple. A shot can break a horse. A command can misfire. You feel your own breath stop because your fate suddenly rests on hoofs far away. Then the charge commits. The ridge pours cavalry like a dam breaking. You see the slope tilt under moving mass. You hear hooves drum the ground, a sound that grows from distant rumble into a physical pounding that shakes the ribs. Dust rises behind them like smoke. The lances stay leveled, therefore the line looks like a wall that runs. Down in the Ottoman camp, reaction stutters. You see men turn too late. You see lines try to form, then bend. You see a few brave shapes run forward, but bravery cannot stop momentum. Therefore the camp becomes a place of frantic motion, tents collapsing, animals panicking, guns abandoned mid-load. Impact arrives. From the wall, the moment looks like two storms colliding. The cavalry slams into the outer edges of the camp. You see bodies thrown aside like dolls. You hear a crash of metal on metal, wood splintering, horses screaming. The dust thickens, therefore the scene blurs into fragments, glint, shadow, a lance snapping, a rider leaning low, a banner whipping. The psychological break feels visible, like a rope snapping. You see Ottoman lines fold, not everywhere at once, but in pockets that spread. Therefore defenders on the wall begin to shout, voices breaking with disbelief. Some cry prayers. Some curse. Some simply make animal sounds because language fails. You feel your legs weaken because the mind prepares for death for weeks and suddenly receives the possibility of life. But uncertainty remains. A charge can stall. A camp can rally. A desperate counterattack can still tear open Vienna's wounds. You don't know if the relief force is fully coordinated. You don't know if the besiegers hold reserves. Therefore, the fighting continues with savage intensity even as hope surges. Inside the city, people sense the shift without seeing it. You hear church bells begin to ring, not orderly, but frantic and joyous and terrified. You see men run to rooftops despite danger, craning necks, mouths open. You see a woman drop to her knees in the street, hands shaking. Therefore, you understand that relief is not a simple emotion. It is a collapse after holding a weight too long. The Ottoman pressure on the walls loosens. Shots grow less coordinated. The assaults lose their rhythm. You see attackers glance backward more often than forward. Therefore, defenders push out cautiously, testing the change like touching ice that might crack. A small sortie strikes at a nearby trench. The trench is half-manned. A cannon sits abandoned with a lit match nearby, therefore someone kicks dirt onto it like stamping out a snake. Smoke drifts. The sun sits higher. The city still bleeds, but it bleeds in air that suddenly feels wider. You breathe and realize the breath comes easier, though it still tastes of powder. You look down at your hands and realize you grip a splintered beam hard enough to bleed. The pressure breaks, but it does not feel like triumph. It feels like knees unlocking. When the day tilts toward its end, the siege begins to unravel outside the walls. You see tents left standing like empty shells. You see abandoned cookware, trampled rugs, broken crates. You smell spilled grain and horse dung and smoke that no longer feels like a noose. But victory does not smell clean. It smells like sweat and blood and waste because survival is messy. The city you defend still stands, but it stands hollowed. You walk streets and see walls cratered, corners bitten away. You see scorch marks climb doorways. You see glass ground into dust. You hear a strange quiet where a neighborhood used to be loud. The quiet does not feel peaceful. It feels like missing teeth. The cost counts itself in faces absent from a morning roll call. It counts itself in a friend's bedroll left folded because nobody has the energy to unpack grief. It counts itself in the smell of sickness lingering even after the guns quiet. Therefore, the city does not instantly become a celebration. It becomes a place that must relearn how to live. Names travel through the exhaustion, commanders, kings, the relief leader whose arrival becomes legend. People speak them because speaking names makes chaos feel like a story with a point. But you remember the nameless work that keeps stone from falling, counterminers in darkness, coughing men who still carry beams, women hauling water until shoulders bruise, boys running messages through smoke. You see their hands, cracked and blackened. You hear their tired laughter. Therefore, you understand that history is not only made by banners on ridges. It is made by hands in rubble. You walk away from the wall with an understanding that stings because it feels current. Big empires do not always fall to one brilliant strike. They stall when logistics choke, when alliances align, and when a defended node refuses to collapse. In your world, that node is a city ringed by trenches and mines. In today's world, it can be a supply chain that cannot break, an information network that cannot go dark, an energy grid that cannot fail. Pressure stays constant. Therefore, survival becomes strategy, not inspiration. You see the pattern. An enemy counts on exhaustion, on hunger, on disease, on the slow crumbling of morale. Therefore, the defense becomes a battle against time and against the body itself. The wall is not only stone. The wall is the decision to stand one more night while listening for scratching under the earth. The wall is refusing to let uncertainty turn into surrender. The dust settles and the ledger of cost is written into the city's skin. Cratered bastions, emptied homes, graves too fresh to look at. But the siege breaks in the crucial moment, therefore a continent's direction tilts, because one place holds long enough for help to arrive. So do you see the same pattern today? Pressure applied not in one dramatic blow, but in constant stress, shortages, fear, disinformation, fatigue, until a system begs to give way. The lesson of Vienna is not only that cavalry can save a day. The lesson is that endurance buys options, therefore options create outcomes. Imagine standing on that wall again, dust in your teeth, hands bleeding on splintered wood, hearing scratching under the earth. You don't know if help arrives. You only know the next hour demands something from you. When the pressure stays constant and the outcome stays uncertain, what part of you becomes the wall, and what part of you quietly searches for a way to leave?